she thought the light was better. Current perspective on yoga for psychosis, which encapsulates much of the things that are done not only by us in the yoga center, but other people like Urva, some of the AMS studies, some of the people who are doing thesis on yoga here. So I'm just going to try and give you overall perspective. And these are some of the people who really have been behind all this work. So of course, with this audience, I'm not going to spend much time on why we should be talking about psychosis here. But this is a pertinent study from NIMHANS which shows that in comparison to physical disorders, some of the most severe physical disorders like tuberculosis or the NADDM or the diabetes, schizophrenia and depression cause more burden than some of these diseases. So that's the importance of psychosis, but again, like I said, this audience very well knows it. Now comes the question of why should yoga be tried in this kind of disorder. Now if you look at very closely at the NIMHANS logo, which all of us see almost every day, most of you would have read on the bottom that it says Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. What that means is explained by this shloka from the Bhagavad Gita. It says Yogastha Kuru Karmani Sangam Tyaktva Dhananjaya Siddhi Asiddhi Samo Bhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. Now this line has also become more famous, that success and failure need to be treated by same because of Rudyard Kipling's poem If, in which he says that if you can treat both success and failure the same, then you are a man or a woman to be non-sexist. So, but what the last says is equilibrium is yoga. When I first read the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, I was expecting a lot of focus on asanas and physical things, but surprisingly, it's around 7 pages. There is a set of 196 aphorisms in Patanjali Yoga Sutra. There is absolutely no mention about asanas or any effect particularly on the body. All it talks about is that what yoga can do for the mind. So the original focus of yoga was always on the mind, unlike many people who understand yoga today as a physical exercise, or at best something little more than physical exercise. So if you can see this from the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha is one of the most famous aphorisms. It says that yoga is basically the cessation of the modifications of the mind, or in other words, controlling the mind from jumping to too many things at the same time. And the other one from the Yoga Vasishta, which says Mana Prashumonopaya Yoga Itya Vidyate, which is again, yoga is a way to calm the mind or control the, myriad ways in which it can get distracted. So all of this talks about the mind. And why should yoga be tried in a particular illness like psychosis? We all know that yoga is, if you go to most of the software companies in Bannerghatta Road, most of them have a yoga therapist coming in at least twice a week or thrice a week. And why do they do that? Because they see that yoga helps in stress management. Now, commercial companies would not do something unless it profits them. So you can see that yoga is being used for that. And of course, we know that from studies, for the first department here, Department of Neurophysiology, started doing studies in yoga from the 70s. And what they have shown is that there is definite impact on neurophysiological markers of stress, maybe the galvanic stress response, maybe HRV, all those things, as well as sleep patterns. That both studies have been done in NIMHANS. And of course, cognition, yoga and cognition, much research has been done both in NIMHANS as well as SVYASA as well as abroad, that it improves cognitive functions, especially memory and executive functions. And on the other side of the story, we all know that a lot of people with schizophrenia have significant depressive and anxiety symptoms, as well as cognitive deficits, which is now something which is very well accepted, that schizophrenia has significant cognitive impact, in fact, which will come in before the psychotic symptoms do. And we all know the limitations of the current treatments available, both in terms of efficacy as well as side effects. So it would be very welcome if there is an intervention which can supplement medications, and some of the things that the medications cannot do, maybe it can help. Another way of looking at it is, we all say schizophrenia is a splitting of the mind, the thought and effect. Also, it's a it's been called as a connectopathy, that there is a lack of connection between the different parts of the same person, or the mind, or the cerebral lobes, or even between the society and the individual. So it's defined as a connectopathy. We could call it cognitive dysmetria, or you could say that there are deficits in the corpus callosum which connects the two parts of the brain, but then it's still a connectopathy. And the yoga is the exact opposite. The root word of yoga means to yoke or unite. So looking at it in that way, yoga should be something that is an antidote to something like schizophrenia. So looking at the studies which have been done, this was the first study which we published in 2007. It was a thesis done by Ganeshan Doraiswamy, who was doing his MD here, now in Australia. So he looked at two arms, yoga and physical exercise. These are stabilized patients with medication being stable for around 3 months. One group got yoga, one group got exercise. There was no wait list in this study. And what he found was that these are some of the asanas. This was Somsekhar, who was a yoga therapist, who was the yoga center. Of course, the yoga center was not where it is now, it was within the, so we were doing it in the Ayurveda center actually. What he found is that if you look closely, the difference was really in two or three things. Negative, if you can see the positive syndrome, there was not great difference. The negative syndrome was significantly better with yoga, and of course depression. Going with the previous studies of yoga and depression, we would expect that depression would get better. And also this is again a scale developed in NIMHANS called as a social and occupational functioning scale from the Department of Clinical Psychology in NIMHANS. Quality of life also got significantly better in the people who did yoga. Of course, this was a preliminary study. Being a thesis, it had its own limitations. But what we found from the study is that it's a useful add-on treatment. The improvement ranges from symptoms to functioning ability and quality of life. No serious adverse effect, which also is an important thing. But there was no waitlist arm, as I said, there was no placebo arm in this study. So then Professor Gangadhar, we had a funded study from Ayush funded project which made some important modifications in this study. We added a waitlist arm. We also increased, of course, the sample size, and we added the trends, which is a tool to look at facial emotion recognition deficits of social cognition, developed by Dr. Rishikesh as a part of his thesis work. Who was again a junior resident and then was a senior resident in our clinic. So the design of both the studies are fairly similar, except that this is only in this study, it was not there in another study. So 3 arms, all 3 arms got the same duration, and the exercise arm also got the same duration of practice followed by home practice, and at the end of 4 months all were analyzed in that way. So one information, of course, to the how difficult it is to do is that to randomize 120 patients, we screened more than 1,200. So it's nearly 1:10. I'm sure all of you who are doing thesis realize that it's difficult to get people to come for so long. But what this also showed is that this was published in the Indian Journal of Psychiatry. Again, negative symptoms, there is a very significant difference in the social and occupational functioning scale. And if you look at the odds ratio analysis, the likelihood of improvement in the yoga group, particularly in terms of negative symptoms, was nearly 5 times that of the other 2 groups. So this was published, and the NICE guidelines, the full guidelines which were published in February 2014 from the UK, included these 2 studies, the Ganeshan Doraiswamy study and this one, and they have made a recommendation that yoga may be added as a part of improving the quality of life for people with schizophrenia. And they also said that the evidence is of high quality. They have rated all the studies based on the quality, and they have recognized this as being high quality. But what about, these are all stabilized patients who've been on stable medication with some symptoms but not really acute. We next extended this to another thesis done by Manjunath. What about people who are admitted in the ward here? Can they do yoga? If they do, they get benefits from doing yoga. So we found that they do, and the difference could be seen in as less as 6 weeks. Again, the difference was mainly in the rates of depression and to some extent symptoms, although it was not very significant. Depression was significantly better, and the psychotic symptoms also were better. This is a study from the United States where they looked at institutionalized patients who were randomized to an 8-week yoga program which had 2 sessions per week. This of course is much less than any yoga study in India, which would have much more sessions per week. So yoga and weight lift, and their yoga, they have said that includes postures, breathing exercise and relaxation, which is not very different from ours, although the specifics are not given. And what they also found is that the people who did yoga got more improvement in PANSS and also quality of life. So it's not just an isolated study from here which is talking about this. But the other interesting thing which I am going to connect to my some of my slides later is that the facial emotion recognition deficits are now acknowledged as one of the important symptoms in schizophrenia. What happens to them when they do yoga? What we found is that in this paper we showed that the accuracy score in identifying emotions in these people, which is much worse than normals at the beginning, improved significantly after doing yoga, better than exercise or weight lift. This is what I am talking about. So the change in the yoga group is better than both of the other 2 groups. This is again a study from Delhi. I think RML Hospital, the group led by Dr. Smita Deshpande, where they looked at yoga as an adjunctive treatment. This is not only in schizophrenia, they included bipolar and some other categories, but what they found is that people who did yoga, especially men, significantly improved their attention abilities and cognition. So this is another evidence to that effect. Of course, all is not rosy. Otherwise, we would have been teaching yoga to every person in schizophrenia. It's not so easy. That there are several barriers in the way of reaching yoga to the patients with schizophrenia. One of the primary ones in this study, as you can see here, if I don't know whether you can see, is that the need to come to a center to do yoga is one of the primary difficulties, and people who are doing thesis in yoga will even now tell you that it still stops people from coming because they come from various parts of the state and country, or even Bangalore. Sometimes getting from Bangalore, one part of Bangalore to other is easier to go somewhere else. So these are the things that stop people. So the idea would have to be to reach yoga closer to where they are. So in this regard, now we are doing some work on tele-yoga, where the therapist is in the center here, but the patients or the subjects could be closer to their houses, or in fact in their house itself. So if I were to summarize the studies on efficacy in yoga, I would say that yoga seems to be better than exercise in outpatients with schizophrenia. Both are better. Exercise also is better than weight lift, particularly for negative symptoms. Yoga improves social and neurocognition, and even in acutely ill patients, yoga is better than exercise. Of course, there are barriers which limit routine use of yoga in these patients. Now let us come to a more interesting but also more complicated part of the puzzle. How does yoga work, especially in a condition like psychosis? So, of course, as I told you, anti-stress effects are well known, and most of the studies which have been done on yoga, there is a clear drop in serum cortisol. As we all know, it's a marker of stress, and therefore there is some process that stress is coming down. Cortisol is a mediator of that. What about other things? Neuroplastic effect. This is a study not on schizophrenia but depression done by Naveen as a PhD thesis in the Yoga Center. What he found is that when you do yoga regularly, the serum BDNF goes up, and this is correlated with the number of days of practice. So if you do yoga regularly, your brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is again a marker of the brain's ability to repair itself, goes up. This small study also showed that there is an actual neurostructural effect of yoga, although the number is very small, it's just a preliminary indicator. These are subjects with memory loss, not really dementia or even MCI for that matter. Elderly people with some memory difficulties who did yoga over a 6-month period had a small increase in the size of the hippocampus, which we all know subserves memory. This was again a part of the thesis of Dr. Hari Prasad. And this is a study not from here. It shows that when people who do yoga, we all of us lose grey matter as we grow older. But people who are doing yoga, the decrease is not so much, and in fact, with some evidence it can be shown that actually can be increased. What about the other effects on GABA? This is a famous study by Chris Streeter, who showed that after a yoga session, GABA levels in the brain increase. So this was, I think this is the 2007 one, if I am right. There are two studies by Streeter. The other study where he compared with some other intervention like walking or reading also showed that yoga, the GABA levels go up. And what about how do you see GABA? You can look at different ways of measuring GABA. You can do a MRS study, but it takes a lot of time, money and effort. There are other ways to do it which we are exploring. So the cortical silent period is a measure of the GABA tone in the brain. You can look at it. So this is this cortical silent period. And there are serendipitous observations that the CSP of volunteers who are doing yoga was significantly longer than other volunteers. This is a team study, again Ulvaks is the person who has done this, and this is the data. It's not yet published, am I right? I think we are not published this, hopefully we will. And what we look at this again, these are people who are coming for what many of you have participated in the yoga appreciation course. So some of you might have even been subjects in this study, I don't know. But people who are coming here, before and after the yoga, what happens? This is a study that we try to look at. So the CSP was measured using the 120%, 140% of the threshold when the subject is making the contraction of the interosseous muscle. So what happens is that especially at 140% RMP, you can see that the cortical silent period is longer after yoga. There are blind independent raters with a good inter-rater reliability, and the post-yoga CSP was longer, but it didn't happen at 120%. I'm not sure what the explanation, but at 140% it was clear. Now, how does it connect with the other things that we've been talking about? We all know that schizophrenia patients have low social cognition scores, whether you measure it on trends or you measure it on Socrates, which is what Ulvaks has developed, is a well-known finding now. And the cortical inhibition is related to these deficits in social cognition, which may be measured using the SICA. Now how does this connect with yoga? As we all know, and we keep telling people that yoga should be learned from a teacher, because yoga is learned by imitation of the teacher and also the instruction from the teacher, particularly regarding breathing, mindfulness on the, not just a physical exercise which you see a tape or many people will tell us that you see Baba Ramdev on TV and I can do all the yoga, but that's the critical missing part is the individual attention of the teacher. So one learns by imitation. We have to be mindful while doing the yoga, and the synchronization between movements and breathing is a very critical part of yoga. And the most difficult thing, if you ask our yoga expert, they will tell you that doing it fast is actually quite easy. You can do any asana that you want, but being relaxed while doing it and doing it slowly is the more difficult part. Like Patanjali says, Thiram Sukham Asanam, you have to be comfortable in that posture. Achieving that is quite difficult. So the experience of each posture and then doing the specific breathing exercises, all these I think relate to the improvements in these two parameters. So if I were to summarize in one slide about what we know yoga helps in psychosis, I would say it helps mainly two things: negative symptoms and social cognition. Now, are there mediators to this that we can study? So we know that in schizophrenia, oxytocin levels are low, and oxytocin is what we call as the cuddle hormone and the bonding hormone, which facilitates empathy between two individuals or the ability to understand the other person. And there is a clear correlation between oxytocin and the mirror neuron system. Mirror neurons are a set of neurons that get activated when we see an action done by other person. So this is some evidence to say that when you give oxytocin, the mirror neuron activity actually, including in infants who have been nebulized with oxytocin, they improve their ability to imitate gestures. In fact, there are some preliminary studies of the oxytocin as a treatment for people with schizophrenia, particularly those who have social cognition deficits. Dr. Naren is doing some studies related to that. So, when you do mindful imitation, what happens? This is a study from SVSA in Bangalore, which looked at children with autism. That when they did yoga, they got better at imitating other things, not only the yoga posture, but also other things. And we know again that mirror neuron activity is low in schizophrenia. So, and there is a, more importantly, there is a direct correlation between these deficits in mirror neuron and social cognition in schizophrenia as demonstrated by Veronique and others. And this is what I was talking about. This is again a thesis done in the Yoga Center by Naveen Jairam. This is fairly recent, it was published in 2013. What this showed is that when people do yoga, patients with schizophrenia, their oxytocin level goes up. So there is one, of course we have talked about this indirect brain mechanism. Can we show it more directly? We have used a newer technology like to study the mirror neurons, what we call as the FNARS. But before that, TMS also, Dr. Ram Jain, who is here, is also working on this. I think he has got more samples than this, but I don't think we have analyzed till now. What this is that healthy volunteers who underwent TMS experiments, when before and after yoga, the facilitation of cortical excitation during action observation is more after 1 month of yoga. And Shalini, who is also here, is again doing a thesis, these are again preliminary numbers, and again after they do yoga for some time, their MNA activity increases. So, like I said, we are now using FNARS to study the mirror neurons more directly, and this again is through the yoga appreciation course. So, they come for a month, 1 hour per day, and we use the FNARS system which we are having in the laboratory. Dr. Venkat and others are using this now, and this is basically allows us to look at particularly the ventral premotor cortex. As you can see in this, I have only shown the ventral premotor cortex. This is the probe geometry, and what task we use. Then no, not working.
Button, play button.
So this is basically a contrast between two videos. In one which an action is being performed, like picking up the cup, and the other in which there is a hand which is coming in, but there is no action being performed. So we use it as a contrast between the dynamic initial grasp and the control. And we use the fixed effect GLM model to analyze this, and what we saw at the thing is that there is significant increased activation in the left ventral premotor cortex following yoga during the contrast tensor grasp minus the static control. It's almost like a bold thing in the fMRI where it contrasts two conditions, and what we saw was that the left ventral premotor cortex activation was more after yoga, and this is the error bar of the same study. Now that is of course healthy people. What about patients with schizophrenia? A very small number again, but The similar thing seems to hold true in patients with schizophrenia who do yoga. As you can see, 5 out of 7 schizophrenia patients in the yoga group had increase of mirror neuron activity as compared to only 1 out of 7 who are in the control group. This is just a illustrative example to show where the change was observed. So what seems to happen is that yoga training increases MNA left ventral premotor cortex after a month of practice. Possibly it could be attributed to the observation limitation during the training. Of course, they need much more confirmation from more rigorous studies, which hopefully we will do. Whether this all comes through just a biological thing or is there more to it, if observation could just be a mediator, we still have to study. So this is something that I try to summarize everything in this, that so there is a increase in oxytocin, there is increase in the mirror neuron system activity, which together seems to lead to an improvement in social cognition, which of course makes a huge difference to the functional outcome, because that is the critical thing when we talk about everyday life. And whether the other person, it could be your boss, could be your spouse, could be anybody, are they happy with us, are they angry with us, this ability to interpret makes a huge difference in your everyday function. So we have this is a recent thing that we published on, we actually developed and validated a yoga module for schizophrenia. So while I am on this, I would like to say that if you look at the module for schizophrenia which I try to give here, there is really not much of anything which is close to meditation. It's primarily maybe loosening exercises followed by some asanas and some pranayama. There is almost no meditation in it. This is purposeful because of 2 aspects. One, of course, is we all know that meditation is really a hyper-dopaminergic state. So is schizophrenia. Maybe not in the same parts of the brain, but then both increase dopamine in the brain. And there are case reports starting from somewhere, I think the 70s, which talk about people becoming psychotic after a yoga program or yoga course. Most of these people, of course, would have had a predisposition to this, or maybe they were taking substances, but there is some link between particularly meditation and psychosis. And we have also got referrals from some yoga institutes, people who went into some kind of a crash course of meditation, who were maybe not prepared for it or had predisposition, maybe they were on medication, they stopped it, but then people have come psychotic. So we have tried to avoid. So what we did was that we gave a case example or a vignette of a patient with psychosis to yoga experts, and we sent the module to them. They suggested some modifications, we changed it, and then we arrived at the final module. Then did a pilot study, and of course we are using it in all our studies.